Hi, I'm Jeremy, and this is Verse by Verse, a short podcast all about exploring the insights and lessons of the inspired Word of God. Today we're looking at Matthew 19, verse 26. It's a popular verse, and you might even have it memorized. It's the verse where Jesus told his disciples, "With men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible." This is one of the Bible's most encouraging, uplifting, and hopeful verses, and it's also incredibly easy to abuse. With God, all things are possible. All things. Really? All things? With God, can you rob a bank? With God, can you cheat your way to a good grade on a test? With God, can you tell a convincing lie to avoid the consequences of your actions? Obviously not. There are some things God will never do. There are some things that with Him are and will always be impossible. Helps Word Studies notes that the Greek word for all in Matthew 19, verse 26 means all in the sense of each or every part that applies. In other words, with God, all things that fit within the constraints of God's will and character are possible. And that might sound like a really pedantic point to hammer home, and maybe it is. But in English, it can sound as if Jesus is saying, literally anything is possible with God. But that's not true. There are limits to what is possible with God, limits that He sets and defines. We have to remember that when we're dealing with scriptures like this one, or even Paul's famous words in the book of Philippians, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." It's the same issue. All things doesn't mean literally anything I decide I want to do. There's a danger here in taking these verses and treating God like a genie or a wish-granting machine. If we can imagine it, if we can desire it, then it's possible with God and Jesus Christ will help us attain it. That's not how God works. And that's not how reading the Bible works. When we read the Word of God, we need context, more than just a single verse on its own. The context for Matthew 19, verse 26 is the issue of salvation. Now, what exactly is salvation? That is a huge question, and you can check out the show notes for resources that will help you answer it. But Jesus had just shattered a popular misconception that wealth was always a blessing from God because of living a righteous life. He told his disciples, no, actually, it's harder for the wealthy to follow God because so often their wealth becomes their God. The disciples were shocked, greatly astonished, it says in verse 25. And so they ask, who then can be saved? In other words, if the rich are at a disadvantage, what chance do we poor people have at salvation? That's the context for what Jesus said. With men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. No human being has the power to lay claim to salvation, to save themselves from the eternal death penalty we've all earned as a result of sin. With men, this is impossible. We all deserve death. But with God, all things, here in the context of humanity's salvation, all things are possible. It doesn't matter what class of society you belong to. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or middle class. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter who you know. Salvation is possible because God makes it possible. We all have the potential to live forever with God. Not because it's within our power to achieve, but because with God, all things are possible.
Verse by Verse is a companion podcast to the Daily Bible Verse blog, which you can find on the Life, Hope, and Truth Learning Center. Check out the show notes for more.